Chapter 5 Virginia, a Cornerstone Colony. Jamestown prospers and Virginia grows. The discovery in 1614 that tobacco grew well in the area around Jamestown led to a transformation and expansion of the colony. Early settlers began to build plantations. Those planters who did well could increase their wealth by paying for the passage of their wives and children or indentured servants to the colony. The House of Burgesses. These increasingly wealthy men wanted to participate in making the rules that govern them, like Englishmen in England were able to do. In 1619, the House of Burgesses, a legislative body, held its first annual assembly. Under the overall governance of the Virginia Company, the people had their own representative government. Burgesses, a citizen representative in local government. Legislative, having the function of making laws and in reference to the House of Burgesses imposing taxes. Representative government, government with elected representatives of the citizens. The Second Anglo-Powhatan War. The powerful indigenous societies of the Powhatan Confederacy already lived and farmed on the land the Virginian Company was giving away to Virginian settlers. There had been a period of peace between the settlers and the Powhatan, but as tobacco farms took up more and more land on the James River, the Powhatans, now led by Chief Opechancanough, grew concerned. When a royal Powhatan advisor was murdered by the English, the Powhatans knew that the peace could not last and staged a coordinated attack, killing 25% of the 1,200 settlers. The Powhatans retreated, expecting the settlers to pack up and leave. Instead, the settlers retaliated, and the Second Anglo-Powhatan War broke out. Vicious fighting continued for the next 10 years. Since the Virginia Company could neither protect the settlers nor make enough money to justify the cost of defending the colony, King James revoked their charter in 1624. Jamestown became a royal colony, meaning the king was in charge. He chose a governor to rule the colony in his place and abolished the House of Burgesses. After King James I's death, King Charles I reinstated the House of Burgesses in 1629. Help wanted. In addition to resistance from indigenous peoples, the colonies faced increasing labor shortages due to insufficient food provisions, awful working conditions, and the resulting 50% mortality rate. The flow of indentured servants coming from England slowed. Settlers began using enslaved African labor in larger numbers, starting in 1619 when the first enslaved Africans captives were brought to Jamestown. This meant that enslaved people of African descent and indentured servants worked shoulder to shoulder on the same plantations under the same terrible working conditions. As a result, some developed alliances, like helping each other escape or start rebellions, and formed relationships and families. These alliances made landowners nervous. Blurry labor lines. At the same time, enslaved people were discovering loopholes in laws and using legal systems to fight for their freedom. In 1656, an enslaved woman named Elizabeth Key, the daughter of an enslaved African woman, and her white enslaver sued for her freedom and the freedom of her children. Her attorney was William Grinstead. He also was her husband and former indentured servant. They sued on the basis that under English law, a child inherited the free or enslaved status of their father. In this case, the father was a free man. English law also forbade the enslavement of a Christian person, and Elizabeth was Christian. Elizabeth and William won the case, and both Elizabeth and her children were freed. Landowners followed Elizabeth's case closely, knowing that the outcome would set a legal precedent that could empower more enslaved people to free themselves. In the late 1600s, former indentured servants were forced to the frontier to claim their 50 acres of land. The indigenous people who lived on the frontier retaliated, and the settlers demand that the government protect them. In 1676, after Governor William Berkeley refused to send aid, a group of frontiersmen, led by Nathaniel Bacon, attacked Pamunkey people, and the Bacon's rebellion quickly ended when Bacon died from dysentery. But it was one of the first acts of rebellion by the colonists. Race-based slavery. Between the alliances formed by indentured servants and enslaved African people, and the loopholes that enslaved people found in English law, landowners and enslavers sitting on the Virginia General Assembly, of which the House of Burgesses was one chamber, began to revise and codify the laws concerning the enslaved people in Virginia. The slave codes include the following. 1640. Runaway indentured servants of African descent become enslaved for life. 1660. English servants who run away from their contract face harsher penalties if they ran away with enslaved people. 1662. A child will inherit at birth the status of their mother. 1667. Conversions to Christianity does not alter the status of an enslaved person. 1669. It does not count as murder if an owner kills an enslaved person while punishing them. These codes, over time, refined the meaning of what it was to be an enslaved person in the southern English colonies of North America. Virginians broke from English law to develop a homegrown definition of slavery, a race-based system of perpetual inheritable property. The codes also worked to keep poor white people from allying with their enslaved peers. In later years, wealthy plantation owners used these codes to reassure poor white laborers that even though they had it bad, at least they were not enslaved. Interracial marriage was illegal in Virginia until the Supreme Court ruled such bans as unconstitutional in 1967. The beginnings of Black American culture. Enslaved people were brought from all over Western Africa and were spread out once they arrived in the Americas. Because of this dysphoria, enslaved Africans in the Americas formed new cultures built from their differing backgrounds and their common experiences. Enslavers knew that the people they purchased came from diverse societies in Africa. They intentionally tried to erase African culture by separating people with the same background or language. Enslavers sent some people to work in houses and others to work in fields. They mixed people from different societies together. Dysphoria. The scattering of people from their homelands to a variety of diverse places, usually not voluntarily, but through force or as refugees. Enslaved people in the southern colonies often lived to old age, unlike enslaved people in the Sugar Islands. Despite the enslavers' attempts to erase their culture and identities, enslaved people formed families and communities and developed a distinct African American culture that blended Christianity with diverse African traditions and languages. Religion. Many enslaved people adopted elements of Christianity. The enslaved Africans used their Christian faith to sustain themselves and to negotiate for free work Sundays, and spirituals became a major element of their worship and resistance. Spiritual. A religious folk song created by enslaved African people in the Americas. Song, dance, and storytelling. Influenced by African traditions, song, dance, and storytelling were essential for building community. Songs boosted morale during work and communicated secret messages. Stories taught traditional African morals and cleverly poked fun at their white enslavers. Dance preserved African culture and provided joy. Family. Though enslaved people were not legally allowed to marry, families were the central unit of society. However, the domestic slave trade meant it was difficult for families to stay together. Enslavers would often split up families by selling members to different plantations. Once forced apart, many enslaved families were never reunited. Eluda Aquano was an enslaved person brought to Virginia from Africa in the 1700s as a child. After buying his freedom, he wrote an autobiography depicting the horrors of slavery, which helped influence British lawmakers to abolish the slave trade in 1807. But slavery continued despite the end of legal trading. Virginia sets the stage. By the late 1600s, Jamestown and the colony of Virginia had become the first permanent English settlement in North America, the first English royal colony in North America, the birthplace of representative government in the United States to be, and the first slave society based on slavery, to take root in English North America. Virginia developed two foundational American institutions: representative government and chattel slavery, setting the stage for the United States to become what it is today. Chattel slavery, the practice of one person legally owning another, involuntarily, servitude for life, passed down to future generations. Protecting the right to a democratically elected representative government united the 13 colonies and pushed them to fight for independence from Britain. Defending other institution, chattel slavery, divided the country. The creation of a society that required brutal enforcement of oppressive slave codes challenged Christian morality and established systematic racism in government institutions and cultures.